From an island in Penobscot Bay to the State House in Augusta to the Capitol in Washington, D.C. Coming up, my conversation with Congresswoman Chellie Pingree on the Maine Challenge. Hi, and welcome to this week's Maine Challenge. I am thrilled to have with us this morning Congresswoman Chellie Pingree, who has been reelected again in November. And we are filming this on a historic day. This is the morning before the inauguration of President-elect Joe Biden after a very long 4 years. Chellie is no stranger to any of you viewers, and she has been, luckily for me, a friend of mine for over 40 years. We were friends when we were 2 and from North Haven, and my grandparents lived on North Haven, so we knew each other there. And Chellie serves on the Agriculture Committee and the Appropriations Committee, and has just been an extraordinary congresswoman for the state of Maine and for all of us. So Chellie, welcome, welcome, welcome. We are so happy to have you on this amazing day.
Thank you. It's an exciting day, and it's great to be with you. Thank you so much.
Yeah, it's great. So here we are, and I don't want to spend too much time on this, but it's been quite a harrowing week when we saw the very last vestiges of the Trump administration and the coup attempt. How are you, and how was it, and are you doing okay? And before we get into substance, are you all right? And was it awful?
Thank you. It was awful, and I think all of us are just still kind of like, letting go of it. And particularly as all of America watches the videos, things that we weren't able to see that day, but just to understand how violent the attack was, how targeted towards member of Congress and the vice president, how violent it was in the Capitol. It's really hard to imagine that was happening in the United States of America. I was very fortunate. I was literally coming into the building, and I was stopped at the point where there was a bomb in front of the Republican headquarters. So I wasn't in the chamber with a lot of my colleagues, but of course have been conversing with them at length. And I think whether you are a staff person huddled in a corner or you were right there on the floor, everybody just felt this sense of, this is a building where we spend an enormous amount of time, have always felt very protected, and to realize, unfortunately, there was just, such a lack of security at that moment in time, but also that there were that many Americans driven by the president who felt it was okay to have that level of violence in the Capitol. Let's just say I couldn't have been happier to watch the president depart Washington, D.C., and to just feel a sense of, okay, our nation can sort of cool off. It'll take a while to recover, but we're putting a decent, honest, good man in the White House who's going to really work on the huge challenges before us, and I hope we get a process of healing. And I just hope we never ever see anything like that in the United States Capitol again, and feel that we're watching a coup in a third world country.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, I agree. And it does feel like, it's really very real and visceral this morning. It just felt like you could breathe, like for the first time, you could take a deep breath. And again, as you said, I'm sure there are things we're going to have to work on with Biden and those kind of things, but he is a good, honest, kind, compassionate man. The memorial service for the victims of COVID was so moving, and spoke with so much love and compassion. And that's just such a shift. So yeah. That's awesome. So better days ahead. So speaking of which, so just tell us about, so for you, now that, we have control of both the House and marginally the Senate and the presidency, what will change for you this session? You serve on both committees. Is it true that you're going to become the chair of one of the subcommittees? Is that this year?
Yes, that all comes together next week, but assuming everything goes the way it normally does, I'll be the chair of the subcommittee on interior appropriations, interior and the environment. Appropriations, the way it's run in the US House, is all controlled by the subcommittees. So the ones that you serve on are the ones that you have the most focus and the most influence and are allowed to set the agenda. And had this been 2 years ago, our agenda on a committee like Interior was literally just trying to, to hold the line, to stop the flood, of the horrible misdeeds of this this administration, particularly around the environment, the Department of Interior, so many critical areas are going into the future, and climate change and the issues that, we need to face now. The good news is we have an administration coming in, and climate change is on their list of top 4 priorities. We're going to have wonderful people to work with. I've been working with an administration full of people in the executive branch, many of whom, they were just coal and oil lobbyists yesterday, and now they're heading up major departments protecting our environment. So the chance to work with experienced, knowledgeable people who care about America, who care about the planet, will just be amazing. So I think that we're going to have the chance to work on a bigger agenda, but one that really deals with the issues that are before us. And I just, I just can't say how different and exciting that is.
Yeah, and it's going to feel like such a relief, just, the idea that we can actually make some progress instead of, as you said, just holding the line. It's so important. So, okay, so the first 100 days of any administration, right, is when they can usually get a lot of things done. And for Mainers, so many Mainers worked so hard to make this happen and to make sure that Biden got elected and that we're there and that you are there and Jared is there. And so tell us, what do you think Mainers can expect sort of on a day-to-day basis? Like in my life, I wake up in the morning, what do you think is going to happen in the first 100 days, or what are you hoping will happen in the first 100 days that might make a real difference in our everyday lives right off the bat?
Well, number one, President Biden and his administration rightfully are focused on the pandemic. The biggest tragedy we've experienced in the past year has been an administration who was callous, denied that this was going on, and then didn't do the appropriate work of the federal government to help us navigate our way through it. We've had an incredible loss of lives, which was unnecessary, and we've had a terrible distribution of the vaccine, of adequate testing and tracing and all the things that we need to do. So in a very practical way, it's extremely important that this administration says, job one, we have to move our country beyond this. We have to make people safe. We have to allow businesses to open up again. We have to have wide distribution of the vaccine, and we have to be able to move on to the next chapter. And that does require a lot of work. President Biden has said 100 million vaccines in the first 100 days. And as we know from watching, our weekly briefings, daily briefings here in the state of Maine, it's been a slow process. It's been so hard for our own CDC to plan, to navigate how to get the vaccine into enough arms. And there hasn't been enough supply. And we haven't gotten the truth or any kind of transparency from this administration. I mean, the biggest scam on the way out the door is all of a sudden they say to us, oh, we forgot to tell you, we don't have those vaccines in reserve. So, for all the things that we know about, and we go on for hours about this, but that will be the most important critical piece in the beginning. He's put forward a big package already, and we're going to have to work as hard as we can to move that. It'll have, increased aid for the economy, longer term unemployment benefits for people who are just still really struggling in the workforce. Another check going to people, more PPP assistance, everything we can to keep our economy alive and then try to grow it again. And then I think a follow-up package that will look at rebuilding our economy, from infrastructure to supporting those things that we know have to happen, to support for green jobs to help us look into the future. I mean, there's a lot of exciting things that will happen in the first 100 days. And, it's going to be tough to accomplish everything with tight margins in the House and the Senate. But I have a lot more hope for it than I certainly would have a year ago.
Yeah. And there's been so much neglect. So as you said, there's so much to be done. But I think that alone, just believing that, I think just the trust, believing that what he says is actually real, right, or that what we're trying to do is real. So I want to talk to you a little bit about actually governing, Chellie. So, there's a lot of, a very ambitious agenda that he has, that I know you have, which is awesome. And yet there are tight margins, as you said. And I want to talk about that in a minute. But first, it seems to me that when the Republicans get power, they just bulldoze. and they just do what they want to do, both in their campaigns and in governing. They don't try to work across the aisle. They don't try to bring you along. They don't try to find common ground. They just do it. And it seems to move them forward. And it seems to certainly gain them, some public interest. It seems like on the Democratic side, we immediately say, okay, how can we compromise with you? How can we, get to, and so it leads to more incremental stuff. So what do you think is the right, and I know it's a mixture of both, but what's the right game plan going forward, do you think?
Well, I had the good fortune of being in the first 2 years of the Obama administration. I was elected with President Obama. And he didn't have the level of experience working with Congress that someone like President Biden will have had. And he also hasn't experienced the last horrific years with this Republican administration. And nobody knew in those first 2 years, to give everyone a little credit, that there would only be 2 years of Democratic control. So I say to people that the number one lesson coming out of that we cannot forget is that you might only have 2 years. Right. And if you don't work on that agenda as fast as you can, forget, is it too left? Is it too right? Is it too compromised? You just have to move. And we have to move on everything we can possibly do. You're right, the margins will be tight. They got the problem with the filibuster in the Senate. I mean, there's still all kinds of constraints that we have. And of course, some differences within our own caucuses, about what Democrats think was important to do. But whatever those agreements are that we have to come to with ourselves, with the Democrats, we just have to move. And we have to use every tool in the toolbox. I agree with you. I think often that, and look, not every Republican is bad. I got some great Republican colleagues that I love. But as a whole, this party, particularly under Trump, I mean, the truth hasn't mattered. Partisanship is, ruled over there. Compromise was not a part of their, lexicon or their agenda. Just total disdain, in fact, for Democrats, and just sort of, the lies like, oh, you're all socialists. You're all like, this ultra left agenda, when all you're trying to do is like, extend unemployment or, just basic stuff. So to your point, I just think we have to move as fast as we possibly can. And there will be times when, to move fast, we can't get everything that we want, but we got to get a foot in the door on, on climate change, on the pandemic, on, racial justice, wage equity. I mean, we have to do what we can. And I think that the secret here to all this is, in my opinion, success breeds both comfort and cooperation. And this whole idea of a divided nation, which, clearly we are, but I think you get a long way with the American public and their distrust of government, or their dislike from those people in the Republican Party who won't let go of their dislike of Biden, by having success. When people can open their businesses again, when their vaccine, their grandparents get the vaccine and they do too. And, kids go back to school, when life returns to normal. Yeah, maybe you still think that Democrats are bad people, but you can't knock the idea that, success is happening. So I think the sooner we can get some of these successes, the more we can push some bigger, bolder ideas.
Okay. I think that's great. And I agree. I think that doing that success, making those little success steps that people can start to trust government again, I think is really, really important. But I want to talk about something that you mentioned was the divide. So the thing that I can't quite ever wrap my head around is that when we look at what people need and want, right? Just people, not Democrats, not Republicans, but people in general, and every poll and every focus group and everything, we see that the bold ideas that you have been supporting, that we support, of healthcare for everybody, climate change, if we don't put a name on it and we just say, does everyone want to take care, make sure that the ocean, we can catch lobsters still? Does everybody want to have healthcare that they don't have to go bankrupt having? It is just overwhelmingly support. There's just even for racial justice and, criminal justice reform. And yet we can't translate that into policy. So it seems to me that the divide sometimes anyway, seems like it's way more up and down than right and left. And the up and down is sort of sometimes a political elite leadership that is out of touch on the Democratic side as well as the Republican side. So what do you think about that divide, and how do we bridge that gap between what people clearly have said for years that they want and the inability to do it in Washington? What can we do
I
about
absolutely agree. And I think, there's sort of the pundits, the consultants, the sort of smug left-wing media, whatever. I mean, our media isn't left-wing, but, just sort of smugness on the part of people. I hate it when people say to me, like, we passed something bold in the House and they'll say, well, that's not going anywhere in the Senate. And I'm like, well, put it on the floor and give it a try. And
Yes.
I totally agree. And I am just clinging to the hope, which I don't think I'm completely off base here, that we have an incoming president who maybe at some moments in time would have been, a rock-ribbed moderate, but, now in his first package, put a $15 minimum wage in there and just says, gotta be done,
Right.
who's appointed some of the most knowledgeable people around climate change and is just saying, we're not gonna discuss anymore, is this real or not? We're gonna figure out how to make it work. So I'm hoping we've hit a little bit of a tipping point. I 100% agree with you that people are ready for bold ideas. I mean, something like raising the minimum wage. Yeah, there's always a few Democrats who will be like, I don't think that's okay in my district. But the truth is, the increase in the minimum wage passed in that Florida district in Southern Florida where we lost 2 Democratic seats. And, that is a glaring example of, people are often behind a bold idea. And you're right, sometimes climate change has gotten to be this, iffy term, but because it's an area I work in, I've looked at a lot of polling data, and Americans across the board are really worried about this. I mean, we're more worried about the pandemic, and we have to be, but we know that's coming around the corner. And the younger you are, the more you see that this is part of your future, but really universally, and that's across all party lines. So I agree with you. That's where the American public is, and it's often the sort of overthinking it, the conservative sort of like, let's just, let's take the safe step. And I don't think the safe step really works for us very often.
I'm so glad to hear you say that, because I totally agree. And I think that part of the appeal of Trump, I can't even say that some had, early on, was that boldness. Again, even if they don't agree with it. I mean, I find that people want that sort of, they want someone to do something. They want someone to be out there. And I think, with these ideas, I always think about I think it was 2 years ago, maybe the election in Allagash, where the voters in Troy Jackson's district, so Troy Jackson, the populist, progressive Bernie Sanders guy, they voted for him. They voted to expand the Medicaid and increase the minimum wage, and Donald Trump.
Right.
Like, right? That makes no sense, except they're all bold.
Yeah.
They're all going to do something. They're all not just namby-pamby stuff. And so I agree with you. So
you're totally right. And I just want to add one thing. I mean, I think there's a million examples we can cite about that, but I can clearly remember, campaigning in 2016. That's when Trump won. Yeah. And people literally saying to me, I remember being at a farmer's market talking to a couple of older farmers who said, I'm going to go for Bernie Sanders if the Democrats nominate him, otherwise it's Trump. And it was just that kind of shake it up, like I'm done with the regulars.
Yes.
Like I'm shaking.
Well,
and that's what we are.
Yeah. And I was so interested in, that one of the things about the Capitol insurgency was that, that sense of rage and how many people are so angry. But, I was listening to, this is terrible, but I was listening to Trump's speech beforehand. And some of the words he said, Chellie, if you put your face on those words or Bernie Sanders' face on those words, we're like, we want the government to work for people. We want now, of course, we know it's a total lie for him and he doesn't mean it, but the words that he was using to fuel people are exactly the same words that you would say, and I think that somehow we have to figure out how to translate that rage or that betrayal, that sense that the government has betrayed us. I think that's across the board. And I think we can use it. I'm curious how we use that sense of, okay, government hasn't worked for me, but we're going to do it now. How do we use that to fuel these things that people say that they want? So, and I think, so for you, like, what could we do? What could the viewers do? The people who are, want to keep moving forward on climate change, or start moving forward, I shouldn't say keep moving forward, but start moving forward on climate change. What is the kind of support and help that we could give you on the ground to actually move some of that stuff in a more the bold stuff that you want to do in forward. Your thoughts?
Well, again, I think one thing, sometimes we get caught in this whole conversation that you just referenced. Sorry about that. Where we get too caught up in the messaging. What's the right message to give to people? But I kind of go back to my earlier point. Americans aren't dumb. They hear this sort of like carefully crafted message, but then they look at government and they say, yeah, but you can't even distribute the vaccine. Yeah, but my business has been closed for 6 months because this, pandemic is taking over everything and I'm about to go bankrupt. So I kind of go back to this idea of we just have to have success. And sometimes success doesn't, always happen in the biggest idea we've ever had, but it's just like, get the trains running again. And I think that, for people who are out there watching with a sense of frustration, we're not going to reconcile all our differences overnight. We're not going to all come together, and we can't expect that kind of, immediate change. But if we can have 6 months or a year of a lot of successes, I think we can start to keep arguing the point. Look, here's what government got right. And we really do need them to have a national plan to keep us all healthy. Public health matters, science matters, and then we can kind of argue the bigger stuff because we've got some success. And I'm one member of a 4-person delegation. Mainers are represented by other people as well. And I think, constantly, paying attention and saying like, get this healthcare thing done, get this minimum wage thing done, arguing for the things like climate change and continuing to make that case with the people who represent us goes a long way.
Yeah, that's great. And I also think that, I wonder if you agree that that the pandemic, as we get through it and, will become a touchstone because it has laid bare so many inequities in our healthcare system, in our justice system, in our racial divide. It's just laid bare all of that, even things like a basic income,
Yep.
right? I mean, when I started running and we were talking about basic income, everyone was like, oh, that is like socialism. Now it's like, oh no, $2,000 a month is barely what we need. So I think that I'm hoping that this can become a touchstone to really move some of those ideas.
I absolutely think so. I think, just as you said, at every level we've seen, we're no longer talking about, a hypothetical racial divide. People are Black and brown and Native American get this disease at a much higher level. And we can see, many of the reasons why that happens. Because I focus a lot on food and agriculture, we're going to put a lot of our effort into this supply chain and just better understanding, like, why are we plowing under, fields of carrots and onions in Florida and slaughtering hogs that can't, be fed to people in Iowa, and then we have people lining up at food banks because we can't get the food to the people who need it. What is completely wrong with our system of how we make sure that everybody is entitled to a healthy meal and children don't go hungry? I mean, that's a major failure in our country, and we've really seen how bad that is. And also, just as an aside, in a state like Maine, we've really seen how people have turned to local farmers to fill in a lot of that need. And why aren't we doing more to support them?
Yes. And that is so exciting. And I want to have you back and talk about all of that agriculture stuff, because I think it is so important. And I think it's the key to our economy here in Maine, our rural economy. It's a key to our health. It's, so you mentioned a few things. Let me just turn it now to, so what are some of the initiatives that you're excited about, that you really want to put your shoulder to the, shoulder to the grindstone? I don't know if that's the right.
Yeah.
What are some of the things, what are 1 or 2 of the things that you're really excited about that you're going to really concentrate on pushing forward, in addition to making sure that we all survive this pandemic?
Right. Well, certainly, I mean, my first focus will be like the administration, that makes sure that the things we've already talked about, the pandemic, the economy, racial justice, climate change, the overarching things that we'll be working on as a Congress. But to narrow it down a little bit, because of my committee assignments and because of the work that, when you're on a committee, you kind of have to focus on getting your piece of the job done. On Interior, I also sit on the Agriculture Subcommittee. So the things we're talking about food, and we'll take that up another time, are really important to me. But on the Interior Committee, because we have such a big piece of the environmental issues, and as I mentioned earlier, this administration, they've put bad people in charge. They've destroyed the mission of agencies like Interior or the EPA. We've lost an enormous number of knowledgeable, good staff and a lot of funding. in Maine, where we care deeply about our environment, a tremendous number of people who work at the Maine Department of Environmental Protection are funded by the federal government. And so restoring the funding, getting back good people, allowing ourselves to talk about facts and science and data, the collection of data. This administration stopped collecting a lot of the important data, whether it's the temperature of the ocean, weather patterns. It's just gone. It's been wiped out. You can't even have the word climate change or anything climate related on a government website. And, that has a lot of impact in our lives. What's the increase in the prevalence of Lyme's disease in a state like ours, where it is really related to climate change? What's the issues that our lobster fishermen are facing and will continue to grow related to the changes that are going on in our planet? So getting good people back there, really working on that agenda. I have written sort of the bill in Congress around agriculture and climate change. So that, of course, will be a big focus about just supporting farmers, changing a lot of American agriculture, working on the next farm bill. So in a sense, you could say I have a lot of focus on the science side of things. Mm-hmm. And in a way, if you kind of dig deeper, that's a really important thing that we have to correct, is this dismissal of science by this administration. And I take a little, kind of as you had mentioned before, a little hope in this idea that because of the pandemic, which has really showed a lot of us, in a broad way, science matters, data matters. Mm-hmm. When someone tells you something bad is going to happen, prepare, get people ready. And if not, you're going to lose lives. You're going to, have a total shutdown of your actual country. So I think we can carry a lot of that thought and understanding into a lot of scientific issues that we have to face in the future. And the biggest of them is climate change, and also potentially other public health issues. I mean, This may not be our last pandemic. In fact, this thing is now mutating into other strains. I mean, God forbid, we still have huge challenges to deal with. Now that we have one vaccine, maybe we got to find 5 more. So got some big stuff there.
Awesome. Well, Chellie, it's unbelievable, but we are out of time, and but we could go on forever. I am so grateful to see you, my friend. And I just want to say from me and from, I know so many thousands and tens of thousands of Mainers, we are so lucky and so incredibly grateful for your leadership, for your integrity, for your hard work. And we couldn't be prouder to have you as our Congresswoman. So thank you so much for joining us on the Maine Challenge.
Well, hey, Betsy, thank you. And thank you for the incredible work that you've done over a lifetime and you are going to continue to do. I'm glad to call you a friend, and I'm lucky to have you here in the state of Maine doing the same work as me. Thank you.
All right. We'll see you soon.
Bye.
Show your support for Maine Challenge and LCTV's programming. We're all about community. Please go to lctv.org to make a contribution. Your support makes us stronger together.